So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sara Tamborski, and I'm the director here at Chat, and I'm going to be serving as your moderator. So this afternoon, we have prepared another webinar for Hyperlexia services, specifically for building social and pragmatic language skills. This is our third webinar on Hyperlexia, so we're really excited about that. And if you've missed our first two, we have those available on our website as blogs, and the recordings are available as well. If you're new to this series, I just want to get a little background information. So Chat is a nonprofit speech clinic. We're based in the Chicagoland area, and this year marks our 41st anniversary. Up until last year, we operated as the Center for Speech and Language Disorders, often called CSLD. And the name and brand shifted to CHAT, which stands for Communication, Health, Advocacy, and Therapy, to help us expand our mission to include more social justice and advocacy work. So beginning with Hyperlexia focus back in the early 1980s, we've been the go-to place with people with few, if any, other options. And we recognize as COVID kind of hit us that world of children that have limited options has drastically expanded. And so we're expanding our teletherapy services to as many under-resourced as well as twice exceptional children as we can. I will have a little special announcement on update and offer for those who are willing to do a donation at the end of the webinar. And we will also be joined by our Executive Director, Corinne Fiore, who will help wrap us up. So this afternoon will be a familiar format to those of you who have joined before. So it's a question and answer style. We've organized the questions that you guys submitted in advance into kind of three main categories. So we'll be kind of discussing some general social interactions, skills related to conversations, and skills related towards regulation. So those are kind of our three main buckets. And we'll touch on a lot of the questions you submitted within those buckets. But if you have any additional questions that you would like to ask, please hit the Q&A button on the bottom. There's a little box, and you could type in your questions, and we'll be able to answer those as we go along, or collect them and answer them after the webinar in our blog. So even if we don't get to them today, we will definitely save them, and we plan on answering other questions in the future. For this afternoon, we have two wonderful speakers. We have Ms. Phyllis Kupperman, who's our extraordinary founder and has dedicated her life and career to supporting and serving children with hyperlexia and their families. And we also have Ms. Ciara Nally, and she is our Assistant Director of Teletherapy and Twice Exceptional Services. She leads our consultative practice for hyperlexia families and has been pioneering our teletherapy services as well. All right, with all that, so we're gonna get started. So if any of you joined our reading comprehension webinar, you know it's very important to build schema and background knowledge. So to kick us off, Phyllis is gonna help build our background knowledge around social skills and social competency.
Okay, so these days, social connectivity is the hot topic, of course, since we're all isolated, except for coming to these kinds of things on Zoom. So I think that also, as we talked about in the reading comprehension webinar, the importance of social understanding is part and parcel of functioning for reading comprehension with kids with hyperlexia. So they're not just not reading, but they're also understanding what is going on between the lines. So I wanted to talk to you about a concept that isn't very often talked about. There are really two things. One is social competency, and that has to do with the way the brain processes social interactions, and that starts at birth with, or maybe even before, with the visual face recognition, the following of the point, all those things that infants learn to do naturally. And yet many of the kids with hyperlexia really don't do that. In fact, some of them really have difficulty recognizing faces, which is a term called dysemia, where they have difficulty recognizing faces in general, identifying people, but also recognizing facial expressions. And a lot of times there have been programs that have been developed for helping children to recognize facial expressions which carry social information, um, along with prosody, the tone of voice that children, as they develop from infancy, can tell the difference between um, uh, an angry voice and a pleasant voice and a nice voice, and all those things, in mom's voice versus dad's voice. So it's those things that are neurologically based that go into what we call social competency. The other half of the schema are social skills, and these are the things that we can that parents very often teach their kids, from as soon as they can really understand language a little bit, and really can understand what's going on with their family members and other people. So this is to say please and thank you, and this is to say how you behave, and these are all these social skills: how to ask questions, how to answer questions, and who to talk to and who not to talk to. So all these things are social skills, and these are things that can be taught our children from the outside in. um, and where they have difficulty with the inside out social competency skills. So that's the basis of the schema. Okay, Carrie, did you have anything to add to that?
No, that was wonderful. I think a little bit in layman's terms, and what kind of helped me understand the difference between the teaching from in and out versus out from in. So the in to out, right? That social competency first is a kid's innate desire to want to know more and to want to engage, versus a lot of times with our hyperlexic kiddos, we have to teach from the outside in. So we have to teach kind of the scripts and the messages to help them engage, that then they'll become interested in and wanting to know more and want to engage after teaching from the outside in. So that kind of helped me understand that concept a little better.
Yeah.
And Phyllis, just for clarification too, it sounds like the social skills are also going to be influenced more about the culture you're in, because each culture's social skills vary a little bit, and those may vary depending on where you're from.
Yes, well, exactly. And in fact, the distance that you stand from one another is a cultural kind of thing. And these days, in the COVID culture, we can't hug anymore, and we can't shake hands anymore, and so the culture has changed in response to the pandemic. And so hopefully when it's over, we can go back to hugging. But but certainly families that come from a variety of cultures have different social skills and social mores and social ways of communication that we need to be aware of, and that are essentially taught or observed by by children. So some typical kids would observe mostly, but our kids very often need to be taught. So.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes sometimes social skills more challenging for others, is that a lot of times if you're, you know, neurotypical, you picked up these skills yourself. You never were explicitly taught them. So when you're working with either your kid or a client, if you're a professional that struggles with this, it's a little, you can't go back to like, oh, how did I learn this? Like, because you learned it naturally. And so we have to think about how can we explicitly teach this skill that a lot of times others are just picking up in a more kind of natural manner.
I remember, I'll tell the story very quickly, but there was a phone call from a PhD student who was having trouble with her mom, and she made a mistake and lent money to the wrong person probably, and the mom said, you know, well, why don't you know that? Everybody knows that you just don't give money to anybody. And the graduate student was, who's, you know, brilliant in many ways, said, but you never told me that. I was never taught that. How could I know it if you never told me that? And so this is just an illustration of the social competency difficulty, even though she had wonderful social skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example. So we're going to kick off with kind of that more general group of questions. So to start us off, there's some questions about encouraging engagement or encouraging kind of shared interest with peers. Like, how do you help that engagement and interest with other peers?
Uh-huh. So, Ciara, do you want to start that, or?
Yeah. So I really like to kind of start with what the kiddo in question is interested in. So what is your hyperlexic kiddo's passions and interests? And then let's see if we can start a play group or have friends over that are to play those kind of things, so that referring back to our previous webinar, they have kind of the schema and the background knowledge in order to kind of verbally interact, as well as socially interact with how to play with these things. Actually, I had a family recently share a really fun picture that I'd love to share with you guys, about how she got her little one engaged in a gross motor activity, which I highly recommend as well. And as you can see, they have this very typical gross motor activity, hopscotch, but then had the written word in there. And so there's engagement there, and there's motivation, and there's different skill sets too that the hyperlexic kiddo is able to kind of show and demonstrate as interaction with another peer. Sara, I actually really liked what you were kind of telling us just prior to this about how you had some activities and then incorporated writing and reading during that activity.
Yeah, so this was like a group class, and it was an activity to kind of get to know you. So, you know, everyone was, you know, going around and answering the posed question. And so the first one was something along the lines of, you know, what is your favorite movie? And everyone's kind of going around. It's the beginning of this group. It's kind of an icebreaker. And so we used this opportunity to, for one of the hyperlexic kiddos in the group, and this was like a young teen group, to help her stay engaged, is she went to the whiteboard and she was writing down everyone's responses. So Sally said that her favorite movie is this, and Mike said his favorite movie is this. And it was really beneficial because it was a very natural thing. It was still participating in the exact same conversation and activity that everyone else was doing, but it was giving her an opportunity to help stay focused, because by having the job of the scribe, she had to really listen to each person and pay attention to what each person was saying. And so it was making the task a little bit more concrete, which was really beneficial for her. And so it was a great way to just kind of modify the activity that we were doing as a group in a capacity that was really beneficial for her to stay engaged and still help everyone, because then we were able to look at everything she wrote at the end and kind of like compare, like if there was themes, you know, oh, we have a couple of people that like adventure movies, a couple people that like, you know, comedies. So it was a nice way to just kind of make a small tweak.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the theme of all of our social interactions is we're finding a way for them to be integral members of the group, but playing to their strengths. So kind of adding in a writing task to a game, or playing games that are around written word or writing or reading. Yeah. Phyllis, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so the other thing is, you know, whether the child is hyperlexic or not, but many children when they're young, the play is very nonverbal. And so we try to find some gross motor skills or games or taking turns on the slide if you can ever get out to a playground these days. You know, pushing each other on a swing or playing on a trampoline when you can find a safe group, so that the emphasis is not on verbal communication, which is often very difficult for many of our kids. There may be a couple rules at the beginning of it that can be written, or as something happens, then the rule can be written. But with very young kids, very often I like to start with something that does not tax their difficulty in processing language.
Yeah.
So that's another way to go.
Absolutely. And those gross motor games and crafts, they're working on kind of that social competency, social skill of reading body language. So with the game of hide and seek, right, you have to see like their face when they're hiding versus when they're found and kind of interpret those facial expressions. So working on all of those skills during play, and it's repetitive play. So that practice really helps as well.
Yeah. I think that leads nicely into this next question about how do we support social interactions and things that are a little bit less structured, such as something like recess?
Mm-hmm. So we like to bring kids into the world of our child, you know, our kids with hyperlexia, and very often, you know, we talk about some of these activities that are good for kids with ASD, but also good for kids with social pragmatic language disorders, so that are not on the ASD spectrum. Again, we bring kids into their world as because so much of what happens in school very often is the trying to get the kids to join in with others that are already doing something, and that's very often difficult. You have to think about what to say, you have to read the body language, you have to know when to interrupt and when, you know, and when somebody's paying attention to you. And, you know, so very often if I go to visit a classroom, I see our kid standing on the side, but not really and interested in the building things or doing something. This would be in a preschool setting, but not really understanding when to enter the game or when to enter the activity. And that's something that we, you know, need to help coach these kids to be able to see when, you know, when is somebody paying attention to you? Well, when they're looking at you, but if you're not looking at them, that's a difficulty. So
I think something that's important to look for too is there's a difference between a child who wants to interact and participate but is struggling to, and there might be frustrations because of that, versus a child who is absolutely content playing on their own, or maybe they're just the ball boy at recess and they go and get the balls and they're not, you know, engaged in that play, and that's okay. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as educators and parents to say, no, he has to have fun with peers. And that's not the case. I like my alone time, and so it's okay to encourage that. And maybe we can teach some ways for them to express that, like, no, thank you, I don't want to play, or no, thank you, I need alone time, or I need a break, and making sure that we're also providing those very socially appropriate messages for them to be able to communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you know, I often think that recess time for neurotypical kids is a time for them to relax and get out and run and interact with their friends and talk with their, you know, and if you watch the neurotypical girls, they're always talking to each other. And that would be a particularly overwhelming experience for many of the children that we work with. And so recess for them may be an alone time, and that's really good. That's really okay. We have to understand what the function of recess time is or downtime is, and how that works with our kids that may be different than what would be expected from a neurotypical child.
Thinking of it just on the terms of kind of like extrovert and what they need to fill up their cup versus an introvert and what they need to do that fills up their cup is kind of like how I usually go back to, because I know personally I have friends who we're on opposite sides of the spectrum, and what they need to like do to like make themselves feel good is on the other end of what I need. And so, but that's okay. Like they're both are acceptable and both are great. It's so recognizing that you don't constantly have to push the social interaction every opportunity you have. There's a million opportunities for social interactions, and you don't have to seek out every single one that comes across.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So the last question of this kind of group would be, is it better to have a student socialize with students that are his own birth age or more their intellectual age?
I mean, I can take this one, Phyllis, and I think it's really just based on interests. So similar to how a neurotypical kiddo might attach themselves to a friend, it's because they have the same interests and passions, not necessarily strictly age-based or intellectual level-based.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, sometimes a child that's a little bit older is a little more patient and may also, I like to find a mother hen, usually a girl, but not necessarily father rooster, I don't know. But some child that might prod our child to come along and to interpret a little bit, and sometimes it's a little older kid, sometimes it's a little younger kid, and so there isn't a rule about that, and I think that we tend to want the kids to stay within their grade group in school, but not exclusively. So, it's knowing your child and knowing what that child is really interested in and what will help him and what turns them on. Early on, we had kids gathered around the computer, which was a new thing early on, and they would teach each other how to play the games that look very simple now compared to the games that are now, but they learned a turn-taking kind of thing, and they had to explain the game to each other, and they had to correct when the other kid made a mistake, and so even screen time can be a social time if it's with other kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not directly answering that question. It kind of answers one you asked earlier. But Phyllis, when you were mentioning the mother hen, father rooster, it made me think of a really great pretend game opportunity that I was obsessed with as a kid, and I think a lot of teachers and speech paths were, but playing pretend school. And so that's just an opportunity where a lot of our kiddos can be very successful in that environment, but it's also pretend working with peers of varying ages in the classroom. And so that might be a fun activity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so moving on to kind of our next bucket of things is conversation skills. And so what are some kind of suggested specific activities that are useful when teaching skills of, exchanges during conversation? And there's a lot of different rules in conversations.
So when I used to do the first social groups, we had very few rules. One was ask your friend, because we would script that and say, ask your friend, do you want to go first? Do you want to play Uno? Do you want to You want to use the red crayon, and ask your friend, because very often our children don't ask the questions. They have, most of them have had difficulty understanding question forms to begin with. But so the one rule was ask your friend, and then the other side of it was listen to the answer. So, so we had the kids, reading, do you want the red crayon? And then not listening. So the other rule was listen to the answer. And actually those two rules took us a long way in developing play. And so you don't need, there was an adult that I had worked with, and we had Daryl's rules of conversation, and there were 30 of them. Because every week there'd be something that would come up either in his job or in his family or whatever, and there was all these new rules. But for the kids' play, 2 rules did it. At least got us started.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I have some visuals that I can share that I'll use with a lot of my clients. And then just don't be worried, guys. We're going to post these on our blog later, so you'll have access to the visuals I'm going to share. I'm going to go kind of quickly, though. So here's one that I created for one of my students, and his main goal was using a loud and proud voice. And so we had a lot of fun with this one. He actually helped me look up visuals that we could add to these, and we also had some gross motor kind of cues. So loud and proud with some snaps, and that's how I would also use that to kind of reduce the cueing he needed. Rather than a verbal cue or a written cue, I can do, my gestural cue, and then that would help him too. So there's one, and then these get very overwhelming. So please know that when you're introducing this, you might introduce 1 or 2. I mean, starting with what Phyllis said, right? You might just start with greeting and asking a question, or using whole body listening. So you can really tailor these, but it is good to be very explicit with your rules and what's expected. And then, adding on as needed based on their level. So I like this one. I would probably take away these bullet points and just have the numbers, but then these bullet points would be the activity that we do during therapy, where we're brainstorming how to greet, or brainstorming how to think of or introduce a topic, or how to show interest. So those bullet points would be kind of my therapy activities. I also have used scripts and templates for conversations. So I'll have this, and please forgive my graphics. I'm not a designer by any means, but we might brainstorm a topic, and usually you're going to start with, their biggest interest or something that they're very comfortable talking about. So the first one might be trains or animals or something like that. I quickly just drew up an example that's coming where my topic was weekends. So I like having this reference there, because how I'll teach questions is that each question has to kind of include that topic word, and that helps with that topic maintenance. You'll see on this one that I did ages ago, sorry if this is a bit small, the topic was actually today. So then we used each of our WH question words and made sure that they related to the topic of today. And we just brainstormed before having a conversation. We scripted this out together. And then often over here, I'll use, I like this for comments. It kind of outlines positive versus negative comments. And we'll brainstorm over here some comments that might come up when we're talking about the day. So I like kind of writing these out, and then I will often color code as well to kind of indicate whose turn it is to talking. So then you're visually representing that turn taking. And then the next follow-up, once we kind of get consistent with these, this conversation, you'll notice that this doesn't really flow well, but we've practiced asking questions and answering questions. And so then the next step is getting into follow-up questions. And so I just quickly drew this up. Again, apologize for the sloppiness, but explain what follow-up questions are. Follow-up questions show that I'm listening, that second rule of Phyllis's, by asking questions about what was just said. So again, I kind of color-coded that the answer talked about I played outside. And so you've got to use that word in your new question to make sure that it's related to that previously mentioned topic. And so this is fairly higher level, but these are some strategies that I would use to kind of scaffold up those conversation skills.
I also like that whole body listening is a thing that a lot of people talk about, and it's so very important to show that you're listening, or look at the person that you're asking the question of, because the reading of body language as well as the understanding the verbal language is an important skill for kids to develop.
Yeah.
So very often our kids in a classroom the teacher may think that our child isn't paying attention because they're not looking, they're looking to the side. But then if you probe them, they actually have been listening and they do have the information, but they didn't look that way. And so this idea of whole body listening, showing that you're listening, is a taught from the outside in skill, but it's something that most kids learn from inside out as the social competency part of it rather than the social rule part of it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think related to those kind of explicit conversations, like Ciara was saying that was kind of higher level by the time you get to follow up. We talked a lot in the reading comprehension about everything's kind of in like a hierarchy from, different skill sets. And so likewise, you may get to the point where you don't need to have that structured conversation if you're talking about something that they're really familiar with, but you may have to go back to that and really make it really a lot easier if you're starting to have a conversation about topics that are less familiar. So it does go back to that background schema and background knowledge, that having that background knowledge is going to be really important to any given situation in order to be kind of your most engaging social self.
Very, very good point.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also teaching strategies for conversational repair. So if a child doesn't understand, he could say, could you say that again? Or what do you mean? Or, so some of these very simple kinds of things that typical kids do automatically, the conversational repair part of it, because sometimes the processing of language is not rapid enough. And so asking for repetition and repairing the conversation is another social skill. It's a language skill. It's a reading comprehension skill. It's, all that. Yes, she has a visual. Good.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not the exact thing that you were talking about, but I have this in really all of the classrooms that I'm in, and we practice how to be a self-advocate and how to ask for help. So these are different ways. And something that I like to do too, and we do in our programs actually, is that we practice them asking for help. And so say that, I'm using a word that they're not understanding or they don't know yet, and they just say, I need help. Well, what kind of help? And so then they might say, can you repeat? Okay, I'll just repeat this word that you don't know, but did that help you at all? No. And so then they've got to figure out how to ask for that specific kind of help that they need. And here are, the scripts available to them, and then they can kind of determine the outcome based on that. I like this visual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Ciara mentioned, we'll reshare those lists because there's a lot of explicit skills, like she said, and that repairing the conversation breakdown is definitely a really important one. And it's hard to say exactly which skills each kiddo is going to need, because there's some that they maybe picked up more naturally and some that really struggle with. So you kind of need to take like an inventory of like, these are the skills that my kiddo has or demonstrates, and these are the ones that are more difficult. A lot of times for social skills, especially as a professional, when we're doing testing, like it's really difficult to test social skills because you know, sometimes these kids too, they know in theory, you know, what they're supposed to do when you're doing like a test. So maybe they will tell you the right answer to the question. Like, here's this, you know, a scenario. I give them the scenario. They can tell me like, oh, you would do this. But, you know, if I lose the game, then I say, good job. But then you put them in front of a game and they lose, and that's not what they say. And there's a very different kind of breakdown. And so a lot of times what we do from a testing perspective is a lot of just like ratings. And so kind of looking at, here's all the skills of how often am I seeing these skills. And so parent ratings or teaching ratings of when you're seeing these skills, we find to be really valuable, just because you know, it's difficult to capture social skills in a formal test when you're working with kids sometimes. I mean, you definitely can see them, but it's just a little bit more challenging as opposed to like, I can, you know, get a reading test a little bit more explicitly. So the next group of questions really focus around regulations. And so we have a couple different, you know, types of buckets under there. So the first question that was under that bucket, though, is about your children that sometimes act as a kind of behavior or rule police, and how do we teach about flexibility?
Aha. Okay, well, so the behavior police is a very common kind of thing. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, we work so much on rule following that what the child notices very often in a classroom is who doesn't follow the rules. Well, the rule is this, and our kids may be following those rules, but they're very aware that other kids may not be following the rules, and so they become the behavior police, and that is not a good social skill to have. It will not make friends and influence people. So, you know, then the rule is to really refer to the adults in the room. You know, you're not in charge. The adults in the room are in charge. And so, you know, and you may, you know, it seems like tattling, but in some ways, tattling is a necessary social skill to have if you don't do it too loud or too often, which gets you into trouble. I will tell you a very brief story about my friend Adam, who's now in his 30s, but when he was 3 and 4, he came to therapy with his sister, and his sister, his younger sister, just liked to bug him. So when his mom and I were talking together, and we needed some time, I had a chalkboard. Before a whiteboard, I had a chalkboard. And I drew a line on the chalkboard, and one side was Kelly's and one side was Adam's. And that worked for a few minutes. And then Kelly wanted to, you know, bug Adam. And so she would start drawing over the line on his side. And he used every strategy we told him, that we taught him. You know, that's my side, don't do it. You know, all these things that he could say to Kelly to get her to stop drawing on his side. But the thing that we forgot, and then finally he just lost it. And then we turned around and went, what's, you know, he just said, nothing worked, you know, and she's still bugging me. And so what we realized is that what we didn't teach him was, I'm going to tell mom, you know, if you won't stop, I'm going to tell mom, which is tattling, you know. And once we sort of got him to understand that there's a higher authority, things went much smoother between Kelly and and Adam, even through adulthood. So that's one of the things about the behavior police, is that we teach tattling, but in a quiet way, and in a way that the child can understand that the teacher, whose job is it to take care of these things? It's not your job. It's the teacher's job, or the adult's job, or the mom's job, or the dad's job.
Mm-hmm. So I think a complicated piece of this is that it relies so heavily on that theory of mind and perspective taking. So I think something that I would start to maybe talk about is you might want to reframe from that your hyperlexic kiddo thinking they're a rule breaker to maybe there's somebody who doesn't know the rules. How can we teach them? You're reframing that situation into a positive, helpful situation. I think a lot of the behaviors and frustrations that hyperlexic kiddos can sometimes get to when the rules are broken is because they might not have the language to more appropriately express themselves. So making sure that we are giving them the language, similar to teaching them to tattle, which is an absolutely appropriate skill, just making sure that they have the language to say, no, that's not fair. It's my turn, it's not your turn, and just making sure that we're giving them the ability to disagree and negate. I think something else too that I'll do is teaching and having social stories for how to better approach a situation. So it might be, oh, we broke the rule. What can we do? And kind of providing a script and that internal monologue for them to kind of process through what happens when a rule is broken. Maybe you talk about the size of the problem. And I know that sometimes that can be kind of conflicting, because to a little 3-4-year-old, losing a game is a huge problem, and it's only because we've lived through a lot of game losses that it's not that big of a problem anymore. So we have to be fair in what size that problem truly is for that younger kiddo, but just kind of scripting that. And then I like to kind of turn the tables, and we might play a game where we're purposely losing, or we're purposely breaking the rules, or we purposely don't know what's coming next. And so there's games like the game of Clue, where you don't know the answer, and that's okay. And the whole part of the game is finding out and asking questions and asking for help. And even in Clue, there's when it's online, it's most of my neurotypical kids enjoy getting it wrong because there's a fun graphic. And so finding games online that make losing fun is kind of switching the narrative a little bit. I like the game of Guess Who for similar reasons. You have to ask questions and get things wrong. That's just a natural part of the game. Sometimes I'll play Connect Four or Tic-Tac-Toe, where if you lose, that means you win. And so just kind of practicing that. And that's not necessarily teaching them how to lose appropriately or deal with difficult things appropriately, but it is, I'm blanking on the term, but it is kind of getting them used to that feeling, so that when they feel that feeling in a different situation that they have less control of, it's not a novel, angry, upset feeling. It is something that they've felt before, and kind of adjust a little bit easier.
Yeah, desensitizing them to the.
Yeah, thank you. That was the
word.
Yeah, right. So Ciara brought up something we probably should have talked about a little bit earlier, which is theory of mind, which is a social competency thing. It's reading other people's what they're thinking about what they're thinking. So thinking about what they know, thinking about taking the perspective of another person. And so theory of mind is something that takes, actually it was, because it's a neurological construct for social competency, the theory is that it developed in humans so they could read body language and put themselves in another place of their enemies, so that they could then survive better. So it's a survival skill, and it still is a survival skill. So and theory of mind, uh, part of the difficulty is that it's when we try to teach it with kids, it's heavily language based, and so the typical way of testing whether a child uh, understands the theory of mind is the Sally-Ann test, where um, there's three people in the room, and a ball is placed in a box, and then one person goes out, and then the question's asked, or then the ball is changed to the other box without the other person knowing it, and then you ask the child, where do you think that person will look for the ball? And so very often our kids say where the ball really is now, where it was moved, rather than say, oh yeah, he didn't know that that was moved. So that's a theory of mind kind of thing. So we play that game. I tried it with a couple of the kids doing that Sally-Ann trick protocol, and the only thing that got them to actually do it right is if I said, we're going to trick Dad, who was the one out of the room. We're going to trick. He said, oh, it's a trick. Okay. Then they got the idea that we tricked him because he didn't know. And that began some of my early theory of mind teaching, I guess.
Yeah. I have a picture up that I was actually going to present earlier for kind of conversation skills, but it would be great for this. I just found a picture of two boys playing, and it might be helpful if you had, your kiddo and their sibling or their friend playing a game, and if there's a difficult time you might practice, he might say like, I'm sad. And so then they're kind of connecting this message with this person. And then you might provide, what can you say back? I'm sorry, the screen isn't really showing up, but that's okay. Or I guess it's an appropriate response to I'm sad, but you can say I'm sorry, or, provide those scripts using that visual cue, but then also it's kind of providing some context that they might be able to look at that and say, oh, I remember that situation, or maybe he's sad because he lost the game, and so he might script out, I'm sad because I lost, and then you can provide the script for, that's okay, let's try again, or I'll try next time, or I still had fun. And so you're kind of able to attach those scripts to future sessions and playtimes when you're playing with trains, or able to kind of rehash what happened just previously as to what maybe we can say or could have said and can say next time. I like using pictures a lot for that too.
Yeah, which brings up the idea that some of the kids are perfectionistic and want things done exactly the way they like them, and if they make a mistake, it's the end of the world. And so there's a little video, a little song that goes, "Oops, I made a mistake. That's all," and making mistake is. That's okay, or I don't remember all the words to it, but sometimes adding a little funny verse or a little funny thing to say helps with that perfectionistic moment.
Yeah.
Moments.
Absolutely. I use a lot of social stories for this. So maybe, ooh, I made a mistake. That's okay. I still had fun trying, or I'll try again, or I'll ask for help. And you might have that social story kind of scripting out. Maybe you're just trying to work on one strategy for them to use. And then once they've mastered that strategy, teach them another. Or maybe you feel that they can take on 4 or 5 different strategies to deal with a mistake or losing. I do in our social program, we actually teach a lot of these scripts and strategies for saying, I can try again, or I had fun anyway, you know, and so just making sure that they're kind of internalizing that and learning from that. So an activity that I love to do with a lot of my students is us kind of being the model and us doing it incorrectly. So often, you know, we'll play a game and I'll lose, and then I'll get very, very upset and I'll quit. And then it's really fun to see the students say, "Oh, it's okay," or "You can say it's okay," and they kind of are the therapist now. And it's just they're able to demonstrate that they have kind of taken in that skill. And even if they can't apply it to themselves just yet, they know the rule. And so they might still not be able to calm themselves when losing, but at least they know the appropriate scripts. And we can kind of act as that catalyst sometimes.
And jumping onto that, you know, so many kids are home with their siblings these days, and you know, a younger sibling may be taking the train car that our guy really wants to have. And so we teach them the tried and true method of giving that child another thing that they think that they would like. You say, here's a better train. You could have this one, and I'll have that one. So every older sibling learns that about their younger sibling. But this is something that we can actually teach our children as well.
Yeah,
one of the questions we got, we talked a lot in a lot of these strategies about teaching the script. How do we transition from the script to being a little bit more spontaneous?
Not so easily. Not so easily. I think that once the script is shown to be successful, then we can kind of change the verbiage a little bit and bring in something that's similar but different, and help the children to apply the strategy with different words. Mm-hmm. And that's hopefully when we get there. You know, it may happen sooner and it may happen later.
I think so. Something that I might do is if here I'll draw an example, but I would kind of create closed sentence prompts. So if the script that I was trying to teach is, "It's my turn," I might have this up for, I mean, however long it takes for your kiddo to use it appropriately. It might be one game, it might be a couple weeks, it might be a month. And then I would start to erase. So it's my turn, and see if they can kind of substitute that word in. And you might have a couple different scripts up here to make sure that they're using it appropriately in context. Or you might erase, you know, part of these words, and then eventually you've erased all the words. And you're no longer having that visual script, but they're aware, you know, in that context that they've got, you know, 5 different scripts to choose from. And so I'm just slowly fading the visual.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that you can do a little bit more easily. Like, I think greetings is kind of a fun way to play with it. Like, can we come up with a different way to say hello? Like, how many different ways of hello can we come up with? There's a lot of ways of like greeting someone, and then like trying to use a different one for each day for a period of time is like kind of a little example of a task. And so, but I think, you know, the point of once you have it, it's kind of that chaining idea we discussed before. So once we have it, it's like, okay, I can, in this given situation, I can use my script. All right, now I have scripts A and B I can use. And then maybe eventually I have scripts A, B, and C I can use for this situation. And then once you have that many, you're going to find your kiddo is going to be able to switch between them a little bit more fluidly. So it's starting and getting mastery on one, and then slowly building upon that. And then their language will, you know, become more spontaneous, and that they have their menu of options that you've given them is much larger. And so you're going to get more variation just given that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe we got almost an hour without bringing up compromising. I feel like compromising is the basis of all of my social skills that I'm teaching in school. And so I don't have, the perfect visual yet, TBD, but here's a visual that has some of the ways that we can compromise. And I might write up here, compromising is deciding together that makes everyone happy. And just kind of expressing why we compromise and how it helps. So you might do a rock, paper, scissors or a chance game. You might just take turns. You might vote. So this is really one of the earliest social skills that I'm teaching, really in all contexts, because it has to do with gameplay, but it has to do with what topic are we talking about. It has to do with, almost every social interaction, I feel like we're compromising. So I think that's a good skill.
And using a list is also a way to compromise. So you can say, I want to play this game, so that could be number one, and then the other could say, no, I want to play this game, and that could be number two, or, the list, it was always, when I was doing therapy, was always the thing that I went back to. The other thing was to, in addition to filling in verbally the blank in a closed sentence format, is to then have some choices of words written out. So there's multiple choice. It's a multiple choice task, which then is easier as a step before just thinking of a word to fill in the blank. But choosing a word that's visual for our kids with hyperlexia is a really step in between, so that they can actually see the choices that they have and make the choices. So, okay. Aha.
As I mentioned, I promised at the end that I was going to have a little special announcement. So Phyllis actually has a couple, several spare books related towards this topic. It's the Source Social Competency books. She has a lovely copy. And so she has a whole box with her. And
it's out of print.
Yeah, they're out of print. And so for those that are interested, we decided that the first 20 or so people that make the donation to the same link you use to register for the event, it's the Hyperlexia donation of $20, that we'll be able to send them a copy of the book until we run out. So hopefully some of you will, find value in it.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much.
Okay, I guess that's me. I was going to say, I bet we could even ask Phyllis to sign them before she sends them. So they are out of print. You can't get them. So it's a double special offer. I'm Corrine. If you've been on other Hyperlexia webinars, you've met me. But I am the executive director at Chat. So I just wanted to pop on, as I do at the end of these, to thank you all for joining and for helping to grow our Hyperlexia presence, so that in this new, more challenged world, we're able to help more people who are stuck and frustrated and looking for supports for their kids. While I was listening to this, I actually went and looked at the distribution of attendance at this one. I was curious. We've got 27 US states represented, plus another 17 Canadians here. So hi, Canada. And thank you to everybody from all around the country that is here with us today. We will be hosting next week a special webinar that is focused on our summer programs. At this time, our clinicians are licensed in Illinois, and we haven't been able to get states to remove that last barrier to sort of parity and cross-state licensing, so that we can just open up all of our online programs. But we are looking at a couple other jurisdictions for licensure. So if you're in Illinois, I highly encourage you to visit that webinar next week. That's Q&A about all of our programs online, including our brand new executive functioning program, which for some of your kids could be quite excellent. If you're not and you're interested, shoot us a note and we'll be happy to chat with you. Of course, we do consults all around the world. This is a little bit different. I did also just want to say, for those of you who are new, I am not an SLP. I used to practice law and do some other stuff, but I am a mom, and I am a mom of a 2E kid. And I think some of the very practical and very based upon real life experience suggestions of Phyllis and Ciara are so helpful. But what's also really helpful is knowing that you're not alone, that you've got a lot of resources and a lot of people that are experiencing similar challenges that want to help. And B, I just like to always thank the parents and caregivers of kids that don't fit in boxes and that maybe not everybody understands, because it does get lonely. And especially now, you guys are doing an amazing job. The fact that you're here in and of itself is a testament to your parenting and your care. And I just want to thank you for doing that for your child, because it makes all the difference. So with that, thank you for this one. We have a couple other Hyperlexia webinars that we will be hosting, sort of part 2 of reading comprehension and part 2 of social in the month of June. So those will all be up online to register for soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.